I want to bring in New York Times reporter covering the Justice Department, Glenn Thrush, and still with me, Mona Charen and John Nichols. So, Glenn, this ended up becoming a seismic issue for both the White House and the DOJ. But it sounds like there was a lot of conflict behind the scenes over how bad this was likely going to be. What didn't they see coming?
Well, what's interesting about this account gives some texture and depth to some of the reporting that myself and my colleagues did in real time as this was going on. I think there was a general panic, not just only within the White House and the executive complex, but also within the FBI and DOJ. There was a massive conflict between Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, and the FBI Director Kash Patel and his now departed deputy Dan Bongino, who was particularly incensed at the way that Bondi sort of bungled the initial handling of the files. What's fascinating about this from the very beginning is that Donald Trump, in the 2024 campaign, stoked conspiracy theories. It is a big part of his energy as a candidate, his psychic energy as a political phenomenon, and he was always skirting around sort of the edges of the Epstein question during the 2024 campaign, because he had obviously a long-standing relationship with Epstein, and that was a combustible issue. So he was treading this very, very thin line of stoking the notion that he'd be transparent about it, and pushing this idea that he was a person who was fighting these shady international conspiracies, while at the same time enlisting people like Todd Blanche, who was his former defense lawyer, to protect his flank on this. The interesting issue is, thus far in this book or any of our reporting or anyone else's reporting, we have not uncovered any definitive proof that Donald Trump did anything wrong, that he engaged, as has been alleged, by several former young women who worked for Epstein, that he had committed sexual assault, though those allegations are out there. So, in effect, the Epstein scandal, which consumed the administration and created these massive divisions, was a perfect storm for President Trump at a time, by the way, and I think the context here is very important. It is the pin that punctured the balloon of Trump's second term. We start seeing him losing altitude, becoming distracted, moving off in a million different directions. And it was the Epstein scandal in the last summer, a year ago, that I think really put an end to this honeymoon period and the notion that Trump was going to be able to dictate terms for his entire second term.
Mona, I'm curious how you read J.D. Vance's role in all of this when you see this new reporting and the sort of behind-the-scenes descriptions here. Do you see him as a political surrogate for the president or as a sort of PR crisis manager?
So before I get to Vance, let me just say regarding what turned out to be an Achilles heel for Trump, this whole Epstein matter, it really is poetic justice, because he invited his followers to believe every conspiracy under the sun. He created room for conspiracy thinking to dominate the Republican Party, or certainly the MAGA world. And so when it came back to bite him, it was only poetic justice. Now, regarding Vance, that's a really interesting part of that account in the New York Times, because what they're intimating is that Vance actually had come to believe some of these things, that there was this huge pedophile ring at the highest levels of the U.S. government, and that they were, charged with revealing it. And, that was always a kind of fever dream of the right, that, was all, Nancy Pelosi and others were abusing children in pizza parlors and whatnot. The fact that Vance may believe some of it is just psychologically interesting. And I think it ties also into something that we saw with Trump over the last weekend when he walked off the set of Meet the Press. He was I was struck that he has convinced himself now, and he has righteous indignation. He has convinced himself that the 2020 election truly was stolen. He started out just lying about it, but he came to believe it. And this is one of the things about MAGA world, and it includes J.D. Vance, where they really do drink their own Kool-Aid. They really do. Their judgment becomes warped. They lie so much that they have to sort of begin to believe the lies in order not to have too much cognitive dissonance. And it's a scary thing.
So, John, these files, of course, are still haunting the president, psychologically warping him and others around him, of course, as Mona just spelled out there. There's this new polling, though, released just yesterday that shows how the American public still has doubts about all of this. And it's bad across the political spectrum. I mean, 66% of Republicans, 88% of Democrats, 73% of independents say they believe the federal government is hiding information about Epstein's clients. This is a Reuters Ipsos poll released on Wednesday. What do you make of this and where we are at this stage, months into this story?
Well, we're talking a lot about Trump here, but I think you ought to expand the frame. And what I can tell you is that I don't know whether it was Congressman Ro Khanna, or someone else who actually came up with this term, the Epstein class.
It was either him or Senator Ossoff, one of them.
Maybe Thomas Massie. But the bottom line is this notion that there are a lot of wealthy and powerful people who get away with things. And it's separate, actually, from Epstein, just this into economics, into how stuff happens. And I think that has really begun to resonate with the American people, be they Democrats, Republicans, Independents. And I saw an example of it the other day. I was up in Maine writing about all the controversies up there. And Khanna was speaking at an event. And in an almost offhand remark, he said, and this is one of the reasons we took on the Epstein class, or something like that. And the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, people standing up and cheering and yelling right on, go after him kind of thing. And obviously this was a partisan crowd. These were people who were sympathetic to him. But I was struck by the fact that might well have been one of the biggest applause lines of a whole night of speeches from all sorts of different people. And I took that away. I took it away with me. And I continue to think about it a lot, that this is an issue that will still exist in November, no matter what's released, no matter what's said. And my sense is it has the potential to be damaging. Donald Trump's not on the ballot, but to be damaging to Republicans who are accused of having covered up for him or supported him or failed to be as aggressive as Thomas Massie has been on this.
Yeah, it's one of the things I talk about this with reporter friends a lot, that affordability being the number one story in the election, just among the electorate right now, but that you can't actually really separate it from the Epstein story because of what wealth inequality has done to people. They don't just feel like, oh, I'm asking someone to help me out to go pass XYZ bill so that my rent is cheaper or whatever it is. It's that they feel like they're in this existential battle against the Epstein class, and they're actually not going to see any change on affordability until that is addressed.
You just nailed it, because I think that where an awfully lot of people are at is put the scandals aside. Whatever the details, whatever's there, there's horrific stuff and things that will be much discussed. But if you go down to this core concept, that a sense that the system is rigged, and it's rigged for very, very wealthy people, billionaires who will soon be trillionaires on their AI fortunes or whatever. And I just think there are an awfully lot of Americans who are looking for political leaders, and they aren't necessarily Democrats, but who are looking for folks who will stand up and say, I don't like any of this, and I want to fight on your side. And my sense is that those candidates who can speak to that could do very, very well in unexpected places in 2026.